What's up everyone, Eric here from Hardware for Gamers, and in this video I'll be taking a look at the second best selling case on Amazon.com, the Cooler Master MasterBox Q300L. Why are so many people buying this case? Now if you like what I'm doing here, can you please hit that subscribe button? It helps out the channel a lot. The Q300L is a Micro ATX case that should run you around $50 US. The Q300L comes with a small bag that has the screws and fittings in it. Cooler Master also provides quite a few zip ties as well, and a user manual. The dimensions of the Q300L are 38 centimeters high, by 22 centimeters wide, by 37 centimeters deep, and weighs 3.7 kilograms. Although that does depend on the orientation you choose for this case. Now the front of this case isn't like a typical case. And what I mean by that is there is no removable front panel, rather it's just a magnetic dust filter on a fixed metal panel. Now that metal panel has many holes punched into it, these holes being 5mm in diameter. Cooler Master has also punched these holes into both the top and bottom panels as well. Now even though there are a lot of holes, there is still a lot of steel on these panels, so the temperature testing should be quite interesting. The top of the case has the same geometric patterned magnetic dust filter as the front, if that is something you like. Now the bottom of the case does have a dust filter, but rather than it being magnetic, it has these little rubber plugs or stopper things that hold it in. Now if you orientate the case to stand up, you will only be able to access this filter by lifting or tilting the case. The case I/O is integrated with the acrylic side panel, and the I/O can be relocated to the top or bottom of the case as well. To remove the I/O, you will need to remove the 4 screws holding it in, and then you can move the I/O to your preferred edge and refasten it using the same 4 screws. The I/O consists of 2 USB 3.0 ports, the power button, there are separate ports for the front audio out and microphone, and finally the reset button. Now taking a look at the rear of the case, we see the location for the rear I/O and tooling for one 120mm exhaust fan that can be adjusted to suit different cooling configurations. There are also 4 expansion slots, all of which have breakaway or break off covers, and finally the power supply location. On the bottom of the case there are 4 plastic feet. These feet have rubber pads to help stop the case from sliding around, and these feet allow for 10mm of ventilation. Taking a look at the right side panel, it is steel. There are 4 screws, 1 in each corner of the panel. These screws have a rubber ring around them that makes them essentially a thumb screw. Now these screws have a dual purpose. The first one is to hold the side panel to the chassis, and the second one is to act like feet when the case is on its side. To remove the right side panel, lay the case onto its side and undo all 4 thumb screws, then slide the panel back and lift it away. Moving on to the left side panel. The left side panel is acrylic, and as I said before, it is integrated with the I/O. To remove the left side panel is similar to the right side panel. Lay the case onto its side, undo all 4 thumb screws, and then slide the panel back and lift it away. Now I'm not sure how many people would want to actually do this, but the right and left panels are interchangeable, so you can actually put the acrylic panel and the I/O on the back side of the motherboard tray. I guess this might be nice if you wanted to have the case on the left side of the desk and still have easy access to the I/O. Moving on to the inside of the case, there is no basement, so having clean cable management might get a little tough. We also see a bracket for the power supply that recesses the power supply into the case. This is done so that the power supply will bypass the corner of the chassis, and because of that, the max power supply length is 160mm. Now looking at the motherboard tray, there are 7 cutouts, 6 of which are for running cables. There is also tooling for 2 2.5-inch drives. The user manual does indicate that you can mount these drives to either side of the motherboard tray. The Q300L supports Mini ITX and Micro ATX motherboards. The maximum GPU length is 360mm, but that will be cut down if you add fans to the front. So realistically, the max GPU length is 330mm, but if you go with a front-mounted radiator, that will be cut down even more. The maximum CPU cooler height is 160mm. Now taking a look at the backside of the motherboard tray, we see a drive sled for a 3.5-inch drive fastened to the motherboard tray with 1 screw. There is also a mess of cable tie-offs along the top, bottom, and back, with some more in the center. There is also 30mm given behind the motherboard tray for cable management. The MasterBox Q300L comes with only one 120mm fan pre-installed, and it's at the rear. Now the Q300L can support up to 5 120mm fans. That's 2 fans at the front, 2 fans along the top, and 1 fan at the rear. Now if you prefer to have 140mm fans, then you can have up to 4 140mm fans and 1 120mm fan. So that's 2 140mm fans at the front, with 2 140mm fans along the top, with the rear still being a 120mm fan. Now for radiator support, you can have up to a 140mm radiator at the front. Now you will need to relocate the I/O to do this, and a 120mm radiator at the rear. So that's the overview. Now it's time to build a test system and do some temperature testing. Okay, I finished running all my tests, and I'm going to start off with the stock fan that I put through my standardized fan testing, where I measure the FPM, RPM, and dBA in 6 tests, that being a 35 dBA noise normalized test, as well as a 250 FPM airflow normalized test. I also test airflow at 6 and 12 volts. All of these tests are with no obstructions. Then I perform the front panel test at 12 volts, with my simulated mesh front panel and my simulated covered front panel. Now a quick overview of this Cooler Master fan. This is the 360 GP model, has a rated RPM of 1000, it is a 7-fin design, it has a rifle bearing, and has a 3-pin fan header. Moving on to the noise normalized chart. So at 35 dBA it pushed 260 FPM and had an RPM of 960. Now taking a look at the airflow normalized chart, so at 250 FPM, it had an RPM of 930 with a dBA of 34.6. And at 6 volts, it pushed 127 FPM with an RPM of 570, and it was running at 32.5 dBA. At 12 volts, it pushed 285 FPM and had an RPM of 1040, with a dBA of 35.6. And when I introduced the mesh front panel, it then pushed 232 FPM, and when I introduced the covered front panel, it pushed only 145 FPM. So there was quite a bit of a drop off once I introduced the covered front panel. So the stock fan for the Q300L isn't horrible, but it's also not great. Now it will work well enough as a rear exhaust, which is exactly how it's been pre-installed in this case. Now before I get to the case temperature charts, if you do have any questions about my case testing method, check the card above, and that should answer most of your questions. In its stock configuration, the Q300L had a very hot max CPU temperature of 65 Celsius, and that is a delta T, so you're going to have to add in your own room temperature to that 65 Celsius. Now based off of these results, you should be adding 1 exhaust fan and 2 intake fans to the system. Now even when I removed the dust filters, the max CPU temperature only dropped 1 Celsius over the fan normalized test. So the issue isn't the dust filter, the issue is the panels. Now compared to the other cases I've tested, the Q300L in its stock configuration is by far the worst case I've tested so far. And the fan normalized test for the Q300L wasn't even able to match the stock NR400. For the GPU tests, the Q300L performed really badly, with the GPU thermally throttling pretty much up until the fan normalized tests. And even removing the dust filters only dropped the GPU temperature by 3 Celsius over the fan normalized test. Again, comparing the Q300L to the other cases I've tested, the stock Q300L is at the bottom of the list, and the fan normalized test for the Q300L is below the stock Focus G. So what do I think of the Coolmaster MasterBox Q300L? The thing is, I don't think I'm allowed actually using those words on YouTube, or at least get demonetized if I do. But putting it as nicely as I can, the Q300L is a hot mess. I mean, like literally, it's a really hot mess. The design of the case is just really bad for thermals. Now I get what they were trying to do, but they failed miserably. Now if it was more like the top of the NR400, which has the honeycomb shaped vent holes with the slats to screw in the 100 and 140mm fans, the thermals would have been much better without completely changing the overall design of the case. Because I don't have an issue with the overall design of this case, I have an issue with its horrible ventilation. Now it is possible that Coolmaster looked into doing something like what I'm proposing, but they found issues like it wasn't rigid enough, or maybe they found something else, which made the changes not work. But at the same time, this design doesn't work, so I'm not entirely sure what Coolmaster was thinking. Because anything other than really low powered components will not work well in this case. Now the temperatures weren't the only issue I had with this case. I had an issue with the welds on the expansion slot covers. They just wouldn't break, so I ended up mangling the hell out of the expansion slot spacer. Now I only have a sample size of 1, so I'm not entirely sure how common this issue is, but it is an issue that I had. Now this one isn't really an issue, but it's just something that was really odd, and that's I couldn't plug in my power supply when it was mounted into the case. I had to unmount the bracket, plug in my power supply, and then remount the bracket. Now I was really surprised on how well the cable management worked out. Even though I was using a non-modular power supply with extensions, I had really no issue whatsoever getting it all in and having it look fairly nice. Now I can't recommend using this case for a gaming PC, I just think it would be a horrible idea because of the temperatures. Now I do understand that this case is really cheap, but you can get a case for just $5 to $10 more that won't thermally throttle your system. Now I'm not saying that this case doesn't have a purpose, it's just that that purpose isn't to be used for a gaming system. Now, because of its modularity and size, it could work well as a home theater PC that you can stream games and or movies to. Just keep in mind that you're going to need to use lower powered components. Well, that's all I got for this one. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're still watching, please hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified whenever I drop a new video. Please follow me on Twitter at HFG_YT. I also have a Discord server. The link is in the description below. And as always, thank you for watching, and see you next time.